So welcome again, welcome to our talk, not my talk, which will be continuing the theme of medical devices, operating them securely, but from a slightly different angle. Thank you, Greg, for bringing the overall governance perspective, and thank you, Seth, for introducing challenges for medical device security with regulators. We want now to together boil it down to what does it mean in practice and how does it in particularly work with between manufacturers and operators, because operators like Mike, and he will introduce himself in a second, they bear the risk, the legal risk, and then we provide devices that you run. And so I think it's interesting in the end how it all works out, given regulations, given standards, giving ideas how to do this, how to run this show securely. And just from my person, I'm Hans-Bart von Stockhausen. I'm part of the corporate cybersecurity team at Siemens Healthineers. I'm in medical devices since over 25 years. I'm in cybersecurity for medical devices in over 14 years. And yeah, my current role is being the customer advocate. So I'm supposed to bring the customer's voice into the cybersecurity of Siemens devices.
Great. So, hi, my name is Mike Durrett. So I'm the Executive Director of Information Security at Wellstar Health. Wellstar Health is the largest nonprofit healthcare provider in the state of Georgia. So we work with, obviously, medical device manufacturers all the time, and a pleasure to meet with Dr. Hans Martin several years ago, and we've been working together for a couple of years now.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Mike. So first of all, I'd like to we'd like to zoom out a little bit. I think, Greg, you mentioned the complexity of the healthcare sector overall. And in the end, we do have that common goal of business continuity in treating patients. So it's not about, well, of course, it's about competition and revenue and all of that, but in the end, it's the patient. And if we ask who's the patient, then I think it's your quote.
Right. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, we were in a room of HDOs and MDMs, and essentially it all boils down to this. Everyone in this room, including this virtual room, is either a patient, was a patient, knows somebody, loves somebody, cares for somebody that will be a healthcare patient at some point in their life. And so I employed everybody in the room, both the HDO and the MDM side, to let's all look at this as we're all patients. We're all of the human race. We're all here in this together. So how do we make sure that we treat this appropriately? How do we work together and collaborate together? And, I think in previous discussions we had where we can't rely on regulation for everything. Right? Regulation in some cases overextends and pushes costs down and push down complexity and things like that. So, self-regulation is great to a point as long as we could all agree on what those are. And so that's collaboration, right? And so that's where this becomes critical and important.
And it is highly complex. So
It is.
you see these, and it's probably incomplete, these at least 6 main players that we identified, on which that security or the business continuity from patient perspective depends on. So hospitals, providers, device manufacturers, pharma, lab services. In the recent past, we saw that putting one out of the game, out of the equation, has definitely limitations or a high impact on delivering care as a healthcare sector. But for today, we want to really dive into one specific relationship, which is the relationship between HDOs and MDMs. And the picture doesn't become easier if we just focus on 2 of us, because each of us is also dependent on not a network, but the famous supply chain, or I like to say supply tree, because chain sounds like super easy to manage, but the tree is more what it looks like. I think it's more complex, and you don't see all the details hidden up there in the foliage of the tree. But finally, if you look at the picture, it's very similar. So each of us is dependent on similar roles, on suppliers, me being yours, but we have our own lots of them. There's devices that we both depend upon us building them, you using them correctly. Then there's facilities to build the devices securely that we have to protect. There's your infrastructure, your environment that you have to protect, networks, IT. So we both have very similar scenarios that we need to secure in order to deliver secure products and secure patient care securely. Don't know whether you want to add.
No, I think that's exactly right.
So looking at now at the zooming one step further into the scenario, which would be on your side now,
Right.
your infrastructure, it looks like there's these colors combinations all over the place.
Right. And so we have this varying degree of multiple medical device manufacturers in different stages of security maturity. We have our regular IT folks, right? I plug my laptop in just like everybody else, and a desktop. And so, sometimes as an organization, we forget that sometimes as much as half of our organization doesn't see patients. And so we focus sometimes strictly on the biomedical side, on the patient support side and everything else. But there is a whole financial side and IT side and HR and IT team that supports all of these wonderful doctors and nurses on the front line. So how do we become better advocates for that? And a lot of that is understanding each other's pain, right? And I think I came from GE. I was a manufacturer at one point in my career, and now I've been on this side for 5 years. I have a little bit of an idea, but certainly not the full scope and picture that your side actually sees. So getting us to kind of collaborate together on what's the requirement, how do we make this easier and better for folks to do things, not just from a large enterprise size, right? We're in the top 50, middle 50s of the top 100 medical providers in the country. How do I do this for the rural hospitals, right? The smaller organizations that still might have a Siemens product or a Philips product or another MDM. How do we do this appropriately? And I think Greg mentioned the HICP as a solution, but again, relying on regulation is not the answer, right? Regulation is very overhanded sometimes, overextended, late. Cost creation, and that cost gets pushed down from the MDM to the HDO. So how do I help you all help us help everyone?
And it needs to be loose enough to give guardrails for all scenarios, which makes it open to interpretation.
100%.
And it looks good or easy
right.
on the governance side.
Right.
But if you have to bring it to life, then you need to ask the same questions similarly to different scenarios. And you may come to different conclusions, though, but in the end, it's the important thing to really understand the gist and the meaning of the rules to make it happen in an individual scenario. So, which brings us to how do we work together on it? I like to show this slide remind to the term that was coined 2014 about shared responsibility, which was that kind of soothing blanket over the internet, over the industry, because beforehand, there were like quarrels arose between MDMs and HDOs, like who is it that is really to provide the secure or the safe operations, secure operations of devices. And I still like the term, but I think as we will see later, it needs some clarification, because also shared responsibility makes us feel good,
right?
Because we know it's us, but only diving into the details brings up how it really works and when and where it should work. So to avoid scenarios where we relied on shared responsibility and everybody expects the other side to do the actual work and to do the heavy lifting. And if we start thinking about shared responsibility in the aftermath or in an incident scenario, then we won't get happy, and the patient is lost, is on the loss in the first place, and it's the legals that will sort it all out. Most likely not towards our intentions.
Right. And it'll dramatically change a human's life, right? And none of us want that.
This is something, the downside of regulations, because doing or like wordings and languages, like working on that, this delays processes. It's necessary to be very clear, but it also has it will take effect only later.
Right.
And it does not serve any immediate scenarios.
Right.
Same with like if you start the discussion about shared responsibility at the time of an incident.
Right.
And
No, I agree with you, Joseph. That's a shared responsibility is term seldom used, but at times not done in practice. And
yeah,
that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
what we need is, and I talked about that earlier, is defined responsibility. So shared
Right.
responsibility as a concept is cool for bringing the challenge to the participants,
Mhm.
but the participants need to pick that up. And
Right.
at the time of deployment, at the time of engagement, they need to sit down and turn it into the individual items that need to be worked upon, or that each side is responsible for.
Yeah. And capture
And
it in a contract or at the very least a
make it
RACI
just written
chart. Yeah.
somewhere. Because I mean, like I try to depict, we have these two concepts, perimeter security. So as a manufacturer, of course, I can say, it's your device now deployed in a secure
Right.
network, which we
Right.
know it doesn't exist.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you come along and say, well, I do zero trust plus,
Right.
so just give me a fully ironclad medical device, we can do that, but then it's 100% secure, not 100% clinical use. So finding the balance between these two aspects is our challenge.
Right.
But we need your opinion because you knowing how you operate it, you or other, and there we come back again to the range of hospital types,
Investment from the hospitals. Right.
which makes it challenging for hospitals to deal with either a low security device or a high security device. And
Right.
for us not knowing exactly what environment it will run in, we would have to provide the variability and for dealing with different scenarios, which adds well to the cost side, to
Right.
the design
Complexity.
complexity of the
Yeah.
design.
All right.
Cool. Um, with that, I'd like to show, and I think we had that in Greg's talk
Mhm.
already with the different roles. Oh no, you were mentioning the different roles in a hospital.
Right.
And
So yeah, so we have and then this is sometimes lost in translation where the medical device manufacturer sometimes only talks to the clinical side. Doctor says they want X device to do X functionality. Fantastic, right? It's wonderful that this device exists. When it comes into how the device operates, I mean, you and I talked about this. I had a medical device manufacturer say that we wanted to plug this device into the spinal column of a patient. I'm like, great. How does it communicate to another outside device? And they're like, through Bluetooth. I was like, this is probably not a good idea. And the medical device manufacturer didn't understand why. So we had to talk through and explain. There are a lot of other things going on in a hospital environment where Bluetooth would not be secure or even communicate properly just for all the noise. Case in point, anybody here can download a Bluetooth scanner onto their cell phone and turn it on in their house, and they'll start to see the matrix go by in the number of Bluetooth devices going on. Go to a hospital and try that, and your device that you're scanning with may catch fire with the amount of input. So, we talk about biomedical support teams, we talk about IT support teams, we talk about specific teams. So, in my environment, I have biomed, but I also have radiation oncology imaging teams. I made the mistake once of saying, "Oh, that's a biomed device." Like, no, that's an imaging system. And I'm like, isn't it a biomedical device? And they're like, no, it's an imaging. So there's all of these teams and all of these things that need to interact together. And that's enterprise architecture, right? And that's not something the world does well at times. And that's where we're working on. But, and then there's my team, which is the information security team. How do I make sure this is secure, right? It's great that it works, but is it secure against all the other systems that we have? And to your point, we might have a hardened device, but there also may be a not so hardened device. It's a modern operating system on a modern application. Maybe it's running Apache, Tomcat on it. And these things need to be updated frequently, whereas this one does not. And so that's a big challenge. How do I keep that updated? Who's responsible? That responsibility chart isn't the same for every situation. And that's really the number of teams that are involved in this that have to be related.
and we need to make sure the that we as a manufacturer have a single point, a single voice from the customer, because today I think and this might be for everybody, we have these different communication streams in parallel. So I talk to you about cybersecurity, but like you said, our product teams building clinical devices, they talk to the clinicians because they need to know their input. And then at our side, it comes together, and we find, or I find myself talking to our product team, say, hey folks, there's security, and there's security requirements from the customers beyond regulatory requirements that they are a must. So nobody discusses about them, but if it gets to priorities of customer requirements, then there's sometimes lots of reasons for doing clinical stuff first, but only if the clinical side of the customer as one would talk about cybersecurity and prioritizes it, then the chances increase a lot that it becomes heard and being implemented at a different speed. I think eventually, I guess we will get there and have all the security also built in all the devices, but it will be much faster if the product teams hear it from the people there on the group they're talking to.
The cross collaboration, right? Not just the product team to the security team to the security product team. It's hey, how do I talk to the clinicians? And that's internally too, right? That's on me as well. Hey, here's why Bluetooth on a spinal column is probably a bad idea, doctor. They don't understand that sometimes, right? And that's okay. They shouldn't have to. They're worried about spinal columns and things that maybe I don't have any idea about.
But I think somehow the idea of cybersecurity and it starts spreading also amongst clinicians or the clinical users. Maybe I see frowns across the table, but I mean, I know that, or maybe many folks know the initiative by Kristen Demeth to bring at least hey, if there's a denial of service attack on your CT in the emergency room, this is bad. So you rather have security at least not in mind all the time, but you know that it exists. And if you go for selecting devices, you may want to have this as a natural point to tick off your list, even if you're working with the device clinically and not. Okay, but let's continue and look at the different aspects of shared responsibility, breaking it down to the infrastructure and responsibilities or upfront other responsibilities on the HDO side and then in the second step.
So we have the physical security of securing these actual devices, right? In some cases, they're small devices, small medical devices, but they're expensive and they're necessary, right? So glucometer readers and things like that are very small and have the tendency to grow feet and move around quite a bit, but also having people make sure that they don't damage larger, more complex machines like magnetic resonance imaging machines. Network security is also a function, right? These devices interconnect across our environment and they need to do so securely. And then organizational security and awareness, right? So as that system is in an area that we call like the beach, which is not just the user side, but not also the medical side. It sits somewhere in between, right? And so we have like Natus workstations that communicate with our sleep team and everything else. Our keep visibility on folks that may be susceptible to epilepsy and things like that. So we have to have security awareness that says don't click on phishing campaigns and everything else because there might be an interconnectivity between your system and other systems, and then operational device security, right? How do we operate these things in the parameters that the medical device manufacturers provide?
Right, and which brings it to me now.
Right.
Bringing secure devices to you in the first place, and I think I just want to repeat it. It's a long-standing phrase that you cannot bolt on security. I think everybody is aware of that now, and so it really starts, and it has to start at the design phase that you think of the threats and the threats that the device might be exposed to, and the controls that are needed to build a secure device. But the implementation, the pre-market phase, is not really what worries me. It worries the product teams and prioritization and how to bring the secure device to the market in time or aligned with the timeline that's necessary from MDM perspective. But the actual longer and larger larger pain is on the post-market side because of the third-party components and the risk, the device, the vulnerability monitoring and patching. This is, I think, the much stronger or much more much harder part to deal with. In particular, if you then think of how third-party components and how third-party technologies crept into the devices, because in the in the old world, manufacturers were building this stuff from the ground up, including operating systems or network stacks and the like. So it was all proprietary and not as exposed, I'd say. I know obscurity by security by obscurity is not a good path to follow, but that was kind of the natural approach back then.
Right.
If I build everything myself, then there's at least the common thread of the attackers taking stuff apart that's used in the millions in the industries. That will not happen, or that will focus them on a very few number of devices. So over the time, starting with operating systems and other technology stacks, now our devices are built, or medical devices are also built with a lot of third-party components, including open source, which is even another dimension of challenge. But we need to maintain the security of that continuously beyond marketing a device, but in the post-market phase as described and requested by regulators. And the real challenge is to bring updates in time and in the right cadence to the devices deployed in HDO scenarios. And I think there's no debate on that we have to do. The cadence is the challenge, because the normal IT scenario is like, I want a patch like 30 days after the patch deployed, 30 days after the patch was published, which is not really working in a regulated space where we also have documentation and project management overhead. It's not like we look at the patch and say, dear Mike, here it is, deploy it. But there needs to be more control on the MDM side for us also to know where it is deployed and how it is deployed, that it's deployed correctly. All of that drags it out a bit. And I think the model necessary is really having more like a Microsoft model. We aggregate patches for a single device and then deliver them in one package in a more loose cadence than normally in the IT world.
And then there's the critical emerging threat updates, right? The 0 days or end days that are like, this is a problem, and because this device is connected to the network, needs to be addressed immediately. And that's easier to say and done even between the two, like separately. Like the MDM is like, I can't get a patch through fast enough. And on the HDO side is, we need this piece of equipment active and functioning. I can't bring it down in order to patch it. I have patients scheduled for, procedures. So it's got to wait. And so we both have to deal with this kind of responsibility, but there are, impeding factors sometimes.
And we do have the fast path, of course, if the uncontrolled attribute.
Yeah.
Again, the challenge of definition, uncontrolled towards patient safety or persistent severe harm for patients.
Right.
But is the full operating system compromise? Is that already uncontrolled? Well, it depends on other physical controls possibly being present in operating the device. And I think there's still challenges or still questions that we need to answer as an industry. Looking at it now or in summary, I think if we want to come to a more resilient world in which we spend less effort on, in quotes, unnecessary stuff, I think it would be very helpful if we had a common threat model defined not only between you and me, that we can both run our threat and risk analysis against, because we have ours, you have yours. I know there's documents around, and definitely the HSCC has a document describing the threat landscape, and we both pull from it, but not possibly in the same way. And so we may end up with different prioritization, what the threat means and which one is more, we should look at more prioritized from my or your perspective.
Yeah. And I think meetings and conversations like what we have today and the ISACs and everything else, this is critical, right? As we start to understand how you work in your environment, how we work in our environment, and how we can all work together and be better partners. Just keep talking, right? We're going to run into difficult conversations because you all have cost and margins and sales to maintain and regulations and global regulations, right? It's not just dealing with the US,
Oh
it's
yeah,
dealing with the EU and emerging regulations like India and China and things like that. So we can't be selfish as HDOs and just think, well, how does this impact me? But I think we should have a voice and how do we communicate together and bring that. And you're a wonderful advocate for this. I appreciate that. And then, how do we foster that into our context of this, right? Foster the medical device perspective. These are necessary systems. And, as we start extending outside of our four walls, concrete walls, and even to our four digital walls into the landscape of here's a medical device, Mrs. Fetterman, take this home with you and we will remote in and have that conversation with a virtual doctor session. This becomes even challenging because now I'm not securing Mrs. Fetterman's environment completely. I'm just, the remote channel, but there's interesting context here.
correct. And we talked about the prioritization of requirements already.
Yeah.
I think another pain point that I want to mention is the procurement side of the house.
Understood.
I mean, there's also activities towards having a single questionnaire
Right.
catalog.
We are working on that today
I think
as a
if we
group.
had that we have one way of describing device security once and for all, and then one way of reading that on the HDO side to do your risk assessment, pre-procurement risk or procurement-wise risk assessment. I think this would help a lot and allow us as an industry to concentrate or to use that budget or time budget to focus more on building secure devices rather than talking about secure devices in the procurement process and trying to understand what risks you mean and you trying to understand what we actually describe.
And then finally, standardization, just to wrap it up nicely. I think, having that implementation standardization, but more importantly, data management. So as these systems become more interconnected, that data becomes connected between these things, can we standardize models? So if I need to redirect patients to another hospital, even if it's not on my HDO system, it's an outside system hospital, we can transfer information and data from a medical device to the new hospital from that patient's previous visit. So how do we kind of get better about being advocates of health, all sides?
Correct.
But thank you again, Dr. Hans Martin, for being a great, partner in this. And hopefully you see that on our HDO side and we can all work together.
Thank you, Mike.
Kumbaya, right?
The insights from the HDO side.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we are up to the next agenda item.